This content is brought to you in association with my buddies over at Jam Jam Cards UK. You can find the links to the eBay store and the Facebook page in the description.
Hi guys, it's Joe here from Rufioh. Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time here, welcome aboard. You should definitely hit subscribe and the notification bell before we go any further, and you realise how fucking garbage this content is. But if this is not your first time on the channel, welcome back. For today's video, we are doing a deck profile for the deck I absolutely hate the most, but it is the one that I've been taking to locals. So I wanted to share with you my updated list for the October format. Of course, it's still early days, so there's lots that can be chopped and changed about this. I'm still not certain on one or two things, but most of it really very much just stays exactly the same. I've got a little bit of things that I wanted to talk about as I go through the list, but this will probably be my last one for this particular deck, at least for the time being. I have no plans on playing it going forward. I definitely want to change it up. It's definitely a bit old and a bit boring for me. But for those of you who are picking up the deck, it is still a fantastic deck to try out. It's now considerably more budget-friendly than it was before. That is if you don't factor in crossouts, but there you go. And again, it's a very linear deck, so it's nice and easy to learn, and it does have a really good level to play at. It's not got the highest ceiling compared to, say, some of the other combo decks and things out there, but it is consistently like 1 to 2, 3 maybe negates or interrupts, a little bit like old school Salamangreat. I mean, I say old school Salamangreat like it's not still relatively new, but there you go, that's not the point. Anyway, so we're going to get stuck into the list for you guys. Again, we'll be doing a bit of theory as we go out, and discussing my ratios. Again, nothing too out of the ordinary here, but I just thought I'd share with you, for those of you who are looking about what cards to maybe take out and what cards to put in, and just some ideas maybe you may not have thought about. So just a quick note before we get stuck in, if you are looking to pick up any Yu-Gi-Oh singles and you aren't ready for the October format yet, check out the channel sponsors Jam Jam Cards UK. You'll be doing me a massive favour by supporting the channel. There is a link down in the description to their eBay store. If you go ahead and use that and use the code Rufioh15, we can go ahead and get you a nice 15% discount on your cards. Also, if you're looking to get signed cards, that's definitely a way of doing it. Anything you purchase off there, I'm more than happy to get signed for you. Of course, you may have to wait an extra few days, and we can't guarantee that they'll be tournament legal because, that's how that works. But if it is something that you're looking to get, maybe you want to get some signed cards, definitely go ahead, purchase something off the store and let them know exactly what you want signed. And of course, they'll get that to me as soon as they can. We'll get it signed and we'll get it sent out as soon as we possibly can. Again, that's Jam Jam Cards UK, link down in the description, Rufioh15 for 15% off. Okay, so we're going to start off with the obvious ones, the Tri-Brigades. We've got Triple Fractal. I think this is pretty self-explanatory. I'm sure I don't need to elaborate on this. It's like the best one in the deck. We've got triple copies of Kit. You need to play it at 3. Again, much the same. I don't think these ratios really change regardless of what build you're playing. Obviously, this is the Zoo version, so keep that in mind. But even with Rescue Cat, you play this as is. We're playing triple copies of Nerval. This is probably the second most important out of these, I would say. If ever you Desires and you lose all 3 of these, you're probably going to lose because you just can't win the grind game. And then we've got just 2 copies of Keras. 2 is plenty. There's a few times where I've thought about playing the 3rd, but honestly, it's just a bit too bricky at that point. So, pretty standard Tri-Brigade lineup, pretty much exactly what everyone plays. For a Zoodiac package, we've got a single copy of Ratpear and 2 copies of Thoroughblade. A few people play like Ram, Rat, and Thoroughblade. Honestly, I think this is absolutely fine as it is. You can change it according to your taste, but I think this works really well. It's a little bit sad that we don't have the Barrage, but honestly, I still don't think we should up the numbers from what they are now. Otherwise, you just end up opening Zoos, and Zoos on their own are kind of dead. It's part of the reason I would possibly consider cutting this if you're going to play going forward. I know Zeus is incredibly strong, but maybe there's other ways to go about this. But without the Barrage, it makes this a hell of a lot more, let's say, more bricky, if that's what you want to call it. Obviously, this is a good one because you can just dump this and then you can do your turn 1 plays anyway. But a lot more of the time, this doesn't get its effect off. And just little things like that, just niche interactions that maybe you miss out on a little bit more now. Just something to consider when you're putting together your build. And on to hand traps, again, this is pretty standard as it was before. We've got Triple Ash, best hand trap, hits most decks in at least some capacity, and triple copies of Effect Veiler. It's Effect Veiler, really good in the mirror match, again, depending on what you play against. Keep in mind as well with my list, I'm thinking about my own locals and things like that, but I think overall this is probably one of the better options. I don't think there's any others worth maining that are, insane above these. Obviously Imperm, but that's later on in the list. I'll put that in with the traps. So I'm running 6 monster hand traps, let's say, in here, and I think that they're absolutely fine as they are. Now onto our spell lineup, we do of course have Triple Crossout Designator. Today's the first day we got to play the card. It is the 2nd of October at the time of recording. First day I've been able to play the card, I should say. It's absolutely bonkers. It makes it absolutely hilarious. Of course, there's some games where you cannot predict for your opponent having random cards in their deck to banish, but it does make it a hell of a lot of fun. It's just really interesting. I'm sure we're going to be sick to the death of this in like a month's time, but for now it's fun, so let's enjoy it while it lasts and we're still enthusiastic. It's absolutely fantastic, of course. It just becomes another a little bit like a Call by the Grave. It makes your hand traps a lot better, and of course you can side in cards that are both good with your deck and will help protect you against your opponent's effects, especially with stuff like Veiler and Imperm, which you already know this deck gets absolutely blasted by all the time. We're still running triple copies of Desire. Since this is the Zoo build, we need that extra deck space. If you decide to go like Rescue Cat route, or maybe you're looking towards the Bird Up variant, which I guess more people will start playing when Synchro Storm comes out, then you're going to maybe want to chop this up instead of playing this particular one, depending on your taste. But I think absolutely 3 Desires is correct in Tri-Zoo in itself. So for this particular build, I definitely wouldn't change that. Triple copies of Forbidden Chalice, absolutely insane in the mirror. However, I have found that this is a little bit lackluster against a lot of other decks. You're basically running like 12 copies of the same card. Now, the advantage of that is, of course, that you have an easy way to get rid of it. You can easily side it out or whatever. So 12 copies. I definitely mean 9 copies, but there you go, with Veiler and Imperm. But it's really, really good. The good thing with it is that it is okay going first as well, because of course you can just set it on the field, and then when you pass your turn, you've got an interrupt for your opponent. And that was one of the things I felt with this deck was always the case. Being able to just set up your kind of standard board and then back it up with loads of back row puts you in a really good position. Unfortunately, with the hits and consistency, I'd maybe consider swapping these out for more consistency cards. What those are, I'm not really sure at this stage, but just some food for thought. One of the issues I did find today, in particular, was being quite bricky. Just not having access to the extra Tenkis, not having access to the Barrage is actually a lot more painful than you would think. So maybe consider what other consistency cards you could run instead of this, but if you don't really have any ideas, these are definitely not a bad option. Otherwise, just more back row, like Solemns or, I don't know, whatever you like. And then finally, our 3 one-offs, a single copy, sad copy of Tenki. It's a 1, so no need to explain. A single copy of Call by the Grave. It's at 1, I don't really need to explain. And Harpy's Feather Duster. Now, I know for me this works really well. We get a lot of back row decks or locals. It is really good in the mirror as well. There's a lot of decks that will just play Mystic Mine and just instant kill you, so you don't auto-lose them as long as you've got this in there. There's, again, other options you could consider instead, but I think this works really well in here. At the very least, you want it in your side, but I really like just having a single bit of removal in the deck. It very rarely ever feels bricky. Like, as long as you're hitting more than 1 spell or trap, you're going plus anyway. But yeah, 3 one-offs, and I don't think I would change them. There's not much you really can change about those. Onto the trap lineup, we have triple copies of Revolt. Nothing changes here. Still probably the only reason you can still play the deck. Triple Revolt is absolutely nuts. I'm sure I don't need to elaborate on that. Triple copies of Infinite Impermanence. Obviously pseudo hand trap, but also not too bad going first. You can set it. It's good for being able to cross out Designator as well, because you can protect your own plays. Because again, a lot of people are going to drop this on you. So yeah, just something to consider. Again, absolutely would play 3 of them and wouldn't change that. Triple copies of Solemn Strike. As explained earlier, I like to be able to just set up the board and back it up with a bunch of back row. And Solemn Strike's probably the best one. Honestly, this card it's always insane. It's always insane. It's very rare I ever see people able to deal with this. Unless they happen to have opened like a red reboot, in which case it's kind of unlucky. But for the most part, this puts you in a really good place. It guarantees a lot of the time that you can hit their normal summons, especially if they're impactful ones like, say, a tour guide or something like that. You can really deal with some problematic cards with this. I think it's just absolutely fantastic. And I think it's a better alternative than playing just hand traps, which a lot of people have ways to out, particularly with cross out in the format now as well. So just something, again, to consider. And then our final piece of the puzzle, our Imperial Order. How this card did not get banned, I'll never really understand it. I don't care about Tad Narata. This card is absolutely bullshit and deserves to be nowhere near the game. But whilst it is, we're definitely going to play it. And that concludes our main deck. We'll go on to the extra deck now. So most of this is pretty standard. We have a single copy of Bear Brum, 2 copies of Ferrigit. Yeah, again, pretty self-explanatory. 1 and 2 is perfect. You never need the third one of these, and you very, very rarely ever feel the need for a second Bear Brum. It's basically there to search Revolt in turn 1, and that is more or less it. And you also don't really have the space, quite frankly, to play anything else. We have a single copy of Rugal and 2 copies of Shurag. Rugal is Rugal, you need him there for your combo, but also you can come up with some really cool stuff like being able to regenerate resources for you. If your opponent can't out everything, you're going to get a monster back to your hand during the end phase. You can also trigger off your Omen as well by special summoning during their turn, especially if you've got a Shurag on the field. Stuff to consider, and of course it helps you go into stuff like access code as well. Shurag is Shurag. I don't really know where to start with this card. This card is very, very strong, and again, the deck without it just would not be playable. So 2 copies of this is absolutely fine. Again, we just don't have the space for anything else. In some of the other builds you can play 3, especially if you're playing a build that plays like Prosperity or Extravagance or whatever, but in this particular build 2 is perfectly fine. Then on to our non-try stuff in the extra deck. We have a single copy of Almirage, a single copy of Ancient Warriors Oath Double Dragon Lords, and a single copy of the fucking Doom Boy. This card is okay. There's a lot of games where it comes up just as like a Link 3 as a gateway to get into like access code talker and stuff. But there are some games where you play against people like, for example, Shadows or whatever, or decks where you know they're going to rig the grave, and this can actually be really cool on your first turn, particularly if you know what your opponent's playing. You can shuffle stuff back before they can actually start to go off. It can actually be quite good in the mirror as well, shuffling pieces back into their deck so that they can't get the banishes off. This I don't really need to elaborate on. It's just a really, really good option, especially as a Link 2, and it's very easy to get out, and quite often it's going to be on your starting board. And Almirage is there for when we brick so that we can link off Kit or our Nerval. But that's basically it. But the amount of times I wouldn't be able to play if I didn't have this card is just absolutely unreal. So again, all necessary pieces. This is about the only one I could say that is maybe a flex spot, but honestly, there's just not really a better option out there for what we want. And then our final 2 in the non-try parts, we've got Appaloosa and Access Code Talker making up our Link 4s. Probably don't really need to elaborate on either of these. This is the ideal along with a Revolt and maybe Double Dragon Lords if you can get to that as well. For your turn 1 play with maybe 2 to 3 negates depending on what you see in your hand. And then Access Code Talker is of course a win condition. Plenty of decks just don't have a way to out this, and of course it's still really expensive, so you get people really salty with it. So who doesn't love that? And then for the final part of our extra deck, we of course have our Zoo package, Borbo, Tiger Mortar, Shaka 9. These are all pretty self-explanatory. This is for attacking directly to make Zeus. This is there for niche scenarios with its effect, but most of the time it's just there as a material. And Shaka 9 is for if you open a Zoo and no other real play, you can of course summon a Zoo. Especially if it's a wrap here, you can go Zoo, dump, Shaka 9, summon it back, and then you've got your Ferrigit and go from there. And then our final piece of this puzzle, of course, is double AA fucking Divine Arsenal Zeus Thunder Boy. This motherfucker, yeah, I think it'll actually survive lists. I don't think we're ever going to see this card get hit, but it is really, really strong. And between this and Access Code Talker, those are usually your win conditions in turn 3 most of the time. So again, a necessary piece, and of course it's been reprinted now, so it is a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot more accessible. Unfortunately, not everyone has access to Access Code, but they can at least get hold of this and then maybe play like a Boral Sword or something. Not as good, but it'll do the trick. And then onto the side deck. This is where most of the uncertainty comes in about what we should really be playing. This is a little bit more difficult. Some of it hasn't really changed and some of it has. So we start with a single copy of Pancratops. I think this is like a mandatory side deck card in my opinion. One of the first cards that goes in mine. It's not something I'd ever consider taking out. It always gives you a turn to play. It has an ability to beat a monster off the board and then pop another, or you can force your opponent into activations, and it does so much. I really wish it was still at 3, but it's not. So whilst it's at 1, we're going to play it at 1. Triple copies of Nibiru. Quite happy that this is no longer fucking gold rares. Thank you very much, Jam, for sorting this out, so I don't have to play that gobshite fucking gold rare. The telegraphs to my opponents what I have because it's shining all over the fucking place. Reflections on the roof and all over my face. It's like the old ghost rares. But yeah, enough whinging about fucking premium gold. Nibiru is here though. Really, really strong option, of course. A lot of people will side this in. People who are playing this for anti-combo decks will often play this against this as well, because people don't really respect it. And that's the other thing. You can also just smash the fuck out of your opponent because they don't respect it. So really, really good option for the side. Works really well at my locals again. But, you know, you may think differently depending on where you play. Triple copies of Droll and Lockbird. It's Droll. There's certain decks that just like auto lose to it, and I think you need to have it in your side deck. I think it's a mandatory part again of this current format, and will only continue to be going forward, especially with the likes of Bird Up and things like that coming in. Stuff to consider. I think Droll is just an absolute must-play card. Double copies of Lancia. This could easily be up to triple because the third copy I played here was a Ghost Bell instead. Probably should have just been the Lancia. I was trying to be smart and play this with the crossout, so of course I can hit that in case they try and hit the Revolt. But it just never came up, and it's just not strong enough in most matchups to really make a difference. So this would probably just be better served as being the third Lancia. Lancia, of course, very strong in the matchups it's strong against, because it deals with cost and it deals with effects as well down the line and things like that. So I really like the idea of the third Lancia, so probably would swap that out for that. We have double copies of Twin Twisters. Just playing the two again, a space thing. Just additional back row hate because back row decks are a problem, and you need to be able to out them. A single copy of Red Reboot, much the same thing. Again, people just set in 5,000 fucking traps. This helps you deal with that. And then finally, we have 2 copies of Solemn Judgment for when we know we're going to go first and we know we're going to play against a deck that can easily just, I don't know, Lightning Storm us or Mystic Miners or something like that. This, of course, gives you the ability to play through those. I really wish I could play the third. I just don't have the space. But again, that is pretty much that. And that, my friends, is all for today's deck profile. As I said, this is probably the last time you're going to see this list being done by me. I may pick up on lists on other people at locals, but I think this one's been played to death and certainly took its toll on the channel. It doesn't really need to be there. Yeah, the profiles are kind of pretty much the same, right? There's not too much going on there. I'm bored of the fucking deck. I'm bored of it. I just want to play something different. Not to discourage anyone that's looking to pick it up. I have been playing it for quite a little while now, so it has gotten a bit boring. It's a little bit like the old Invoke decks and things like that. You can play them for a while and they're okay, but they get boring. And then all it takes is a few bad results and you just get really salty, which is exactly what's happened to me. And you'll see that if you see my locals vlogs. Every time I lose with it, I put myself on tilt. So it's really not healthy for me to play this deck anymore, at least for my my personal well-being, before I have an absolute fucking mental breakdown at my next locals. So in order to avoid that, we're going to go for something a bit more, something different, let's say. But considering PK Fire, which is kind of relevant considering I fucking love Burning Abyss, so that's probably going to be the direction we go next. I had thought about Bird Up, but I really can't sort of fathom the idea of playing anything Tri-Brigade related, even if it's a single fucking card. I just don't want to do it. So again, still keeping our options open, but I think PK Fire is exactly what we're going to go with next. So if you're a fan of that, of course, hang around. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that kind of goodness. Of course, we have matches, combo tutorials, all that kind of stuff. So if you guys are missing any of that and you want to see any of that on the channel, please let me know. Again, if you haven't already, you should definitely hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.